Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the Crockett Show in social media history. I want to welcome you to another episode of the War Zone. I got my man Donovan Sadiq in the building, the Queen, Demetra K, and I am the 5-star general. Man, let's talk bail reform tonight. A whole bunch of you states don't want to do it, but guess what? I got two heavyweights on the program tonight. Say this finna be an Ali Frazier fight here for bail reform. Let's get to it, man. Say, man, I want to welcome you guys to another episode of the War Zone and tell you thank you for tuning in. You know, without you, we would not have a show. And we really appreciate you taking the time out to hang out with us like you normally do, because you're the best audience in the world. I want to start it off with the elephant in the room. Somebody I respect to the highest degree, not only as a superintendent, but as a strong Black woman. Dr. Grenita Lathan decided today, and I know the good doctor would never say it like 5-star, but I'm going to say it for, she decided today to tell the Houston Independent School District to kiss her ass. And she is going on about her business to Springfield, Missouri. They're going to pay her what she's worth. And I think Springfield just got a gem of a superintendent. This sets us back about 20 years in education in the city of Houston. For a change, for the last 3 years, poor kids, Black kids, Latino kids, they got a shot at it. And she gave them a shot. Yeah, she was tough. Oh, she didn't, she was tough on teachers. No, she required you to do your job, because some of y'all wasn't doing your job in the classrooms. And I'm going to be honest with you, I wish her the best, but I'll say it the best way I can say it. Somebody said it to Herman Boone when he was over to TC back in, remember the Titans. Y'all may not have liked her, but she belonged to us, and she'll forever belong to us. So, Dr. Lathan, I salute you. Thank you for everything you did for our kids. Now, roll in the next clown, and we'll roll him up out of here, too. What's going on, Donovan?
Oh, man, just the same old, same old. Welcome to the Monday edition of the War Zone. Once again, Black media, where we're going to talk about things that affect the Black community, as well as everybody, but predominantly the Black community, and keeping you informed. We think bail reform is one of the most important types of information that you're going to need. It affects everybody, every class, everything. And the bad thing is you have the have and the have-nots. They can bail out. They've got the money to do that. But the most of us, we are the have-nots. Some of us will lose our jobs. I mean, our whole livelihood is just wasted and messed up just for being arrested. And in some cases, you're not even charged with the crime, but you can't bail out during that time that you're in there. So we've got Dr. Robert Williams here and John Floyd that's going to give us some information and kind of give us hip to the game. And for those of us that are diehard, suffering Dallas Cowboy fans, Dak got his money. Dak got his money. So what you got, Demetra?
So hello, everybody. Once again, welcome to Monday night's edition. If you guys can do us a favor and share this live so that everybody else can get the information and join in on the conversation, we would greatly appreciate it. And for the sake of time, I'm going to give it to Gary so he can get this party started. Oh, and if you guys haven't noticed, speaking of, bail, Gary is out of jail. He's on his main page now. So share the good news, will you?
Eventually you get a parole date. They parole me. I don't know if I'm going to get a violation again, because most of my violations are 30-day violations. But I tell y'all what, we have to have an important conversation tonight. And who better to do it with than two guys that are experts in the field of bail reform. My good friend Robert Williams and attorney John Floyd have decided to stop by tonight. And I'm listening. The big elephant in the room, especially in Harris County, is that bail reform is not working. Is that people are being allowed to get out of jail and commit more crimes on multiple bails. So I need you guys, because we've had this talk, Rob, that we need to dispel that myth about you guys who support bail reform actually supporting, people getting 5, 6, 7, 8 bails on violent crimes and getting out. So how you doing tonight, Robert?
Doing fantastic, man. Better now that I've heard the news about Dak. Future looks bright for us Cowboys fans. I'm glad you introduced us or the topic like that anyway, OG. There has been a great convolution of the message on bail reform out there. And basically it is kind of as you described. And that is that we have violent repeat offenders who are being released on PR bonds or on low bonds. And the message that is rotating around out on the right is that is what bail reform is. It is not. Let me tell you something. There are multiple components to criminal justice reform. Bail reform is one of those components, but people must understand that the aim of criminal justice reform is not to reduce accountability for criminals. It is not. I mean, you go out there and you shooting and killing people, your ass need to be in jail. Next one you shoot might be my mom, right? So the aim of criminal justice reform is not to reduce accountability for criminals, but it is instead to infuse fairness, justice, and equity in a system that has been systemically racist since Jim Crow, right? So we can start right there, and the same applies for bail reform. I had a conversation actually with Chief Art Acevedo on bail reform, and as we plugged our way through it, he told me, he said, Robert, all of these criminal justice reformers just want to see, everybody released out on the street. And I said, Art, I know every criminal justice reformer in the state of Texas. That's not true. He said, well, that's what they're doing up in New York and in California. I said, man, but we're in Texas. That is not here. That's not what we're trying to do. And so we have put together a bill. Most of it was penned by our friend attorney John Floyd here. Representative Ron Reynolds is sponsoring the bill. It's House Bill 2077. And it lays out for us what bail reform should be. And in the end, what's going to happen, long story short, and I'll let John jump in here. Right now, you got 70% of folks who are in jail, man, simply because they can't afford bond, right? 70% of those are also in there for low-level drug offenses and nonviolent crimes, right? Your nephew that got caught with a bag of weed, right? Now he's in jail. He can't afford the bond. He's in there 2 weeks, 2 months. What happened? He loses his job, loses his baby mama, loses his apartment and everything else. And a simple PR bond would fix that. A lot of people don't understand. They think that when we're offering these PR bonds that these folks are off the hook. No, they got to come back to court. They got to come back for their trial, right? But first of all, they haven't been convicted of that crime. But they're still being held in jail. And I think even those on the right would agree, right? That those with nonviolent crimes and low-level drug offenses should not be losing their livelihoods, putting these extra burdens on their families simply for these low-level crimes. John, you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I think and thanks for having us on, Gary. We appreciate coming on the War Zone. I think one of the the great myths is that we have all these people floating around on these multiple bonds. I mean, there are some anomalies that are like that, where we do have people who are released out and commit new offenses and commit sometimes horrible offenses. But I mean, I've been practicing law down in Harris County for 25 years, and I can tell you this: in most of these courts down here, you don't get a whole lot of slack if you violate on your bond. I mean, that's just not the reality. There's plenty of these judges that are still here who will revoke your bond in an instant and make you go back through the whole process. You know, what we see are talking points that are coming from politicians highlighting these horrible cases. And like I always like to say, you know, it's a bad case and ends up making a bad law, right? And so that's really what we're looking at, because most of these people, as Robert said, you know, on average, you got 70 to 80% of the people who are being detained down in the county jail across the state. This goes to county jails all over the state, who have not been convicted of any offense, who are still presumed innocent, but are sitting there wasting away in jail because they can't make a cash bond. I mean, we see cases all the time where people are sitting there and they need to post $100 bond, and that's just, you know, that's just offensive to our concepts of due process and justice that we should be demanding from our court system.
I tell you what, man, somebody going to jail on a marijuana charge, I think, is a waste of time. It's really a waste of time, but they make a lot of money off of people sitting in jail. So, you know, it's pretty easy for somebody to end up doing 6 months on a case that they could have been out of jail with in less than 10 minutes. People want to, you know, have a problem with bail reformers, but they don't have a problem with the system who will allow officers who murder people to get out of jail, walk out the back door, matter of fact, on a PR bond sometimes. But they don't have a problem with that. And where I'm confused at is we are supposed to be in the middle of having all these progressive politicians that run for office, that support what you guys are talking about. But then when you're out there doing the work, these same people are actually trying to snatch the rug from under your feet. Robert, what you say about that?
Well, you're absolutely right. And all you have to do is look back to last session, the 86th session, and look at House Bill 2754, the Sandra Bland Act. That was Democrats that killed that bill. That wasn't Republicans. And it had a lot to do with police unions, specifically CLEAT, the Combined Law Enforcement Agency of Texas. It had to do with money up under the table. It had to do with us not being able to hold our Democrats. I just had a conversation the other day with a few lobbyists up at the Capitol, and that's one of our biggest problems. If we could simply hold our Dems together, we could get some of this stuff passed, right? But at this point, there hasn't been the level of accountability that needs to be there. And quite honestly, there's been some very strategic moves on the other side. When you look at a lot of the committee appointments right now, you know, who is chairing this committee and who is over this and blah, blah. Those things are strategic. And trust me, when the Speaker of the House makes these appointments, you know, when he puts an African-American Democrat over this powerful committee, man, he's looking for something in return. We saw that last session with Dennis Bonner, and he played it to the T. I mean, Dennis Bonner started off that session, looked like, man, this is a changed guy. Look at the appointments that he made. Look, he's tearing down the Confederate plaque inside the statue. Inside the Capitol. He's doing all these things to make us feel that he is going to be working across the aisle. And for half of the session, everything was seeming to be going fine. We had a bill on reentry, Project Rio, man, that was just, you know, we're pushing it through committee. And before you know it, man, everything gets clogged up down there in calendars. They get clogged up in criminal jurisprudence committee, and before you know it, there's not enough time to get this bill out and get it to the floor. And you start looking around at the people that actually have the power to release this bill out. their own people. So we have big problems up there. Holding our own Democrats accountable is one. Another is our numbers, and that's really why I started the Alliance for a New Justice System. I noticed as I lobbied last session that there were plenty of criminal justice reformers organizations out there, but everybody was working independently, right? Everybody's working here, over there, and over there. And my idea, the concept was to bring all of these organizations, also elected officials, also media, influential people like Gary Monroe, he's one of our partners, together under one umbrella, so that when we do walk into a committee hearing and we are testifying, and the first thing they do is ask you what's your name and who are you with, and you say the Alliance for a New Justice System, they realize that it's 100,000 people behind you. Numbers matter up there. And so we haven't played the game quite as well as they have on the other side, but we're trying to catch up, Dimitri.
Okay. Let me ask, we know this is an important issue, but I'm going to address this to John, Mr. Floyd. You said you've been doing, you've been an attorney for over 25 years doing that. Now, my question is this, we think of attorneys as these guys that hang out with the doctors. You guys are on the golf course. It's no big deal. You guys are making a lot of money. What got you involved with the bail reform situation? Because as an attorney, wouldn't you be making just as much money on one side versus the other?
I it was something that was in my nature. I don't know how else to say. I used to go down as a young attorney, and I was shocked the first time I went into the county jail. I mean, be quite honest and direct about it. I mean, it's like walking into a different country, man. I mean, there weren't any. It was predominantly African American and Latino young men, and they weren't going anywhere, right? And over these 25 years, I have seen time after time how the system is just systemically racist, right? And it is just something that has rubbed me the wrong way for a long time. And Robert and I have worked to try to get this messaging out there for a long time. The problem that we're facing, to be quite honest with you, and this is what I believe, is that we have generations of systemic racism that have made it very difficult to message this, right? Both parties have to run this tough on crime agenda. The Democrats are scared to do any kind of reforms because they're afraid that they'll be labeled as soft on crime. At every turn, every time the legislature meets, we have this feel good, tough on crime legislation that just makes it harder and harder to get a fair trial. It's just the system is just weighted against folks that don't have the resources to fight for justice, and typically that means Black and brown people that are wrapped up in the system. I mean, it makes no sense for people to be locked up on minor, low level offenses who are low risk, maybe first time offenders, right? And be sitting there because they can't make a cash bond. I mean, the cash bond system is just obscene. We got a federal judge that said just that. But unfortunately, that particular lawsuit was filed against Harris County, and a judge has said, as much. This cash bond system that we have in place is unconstitutional. It violates the due process rights of people who don't have the resources to post bond, and that affects in a way that is disproportionately offensive to people who are from Black and brown in poor white communities. I mean, that's just the reality. So why we even still use it at all is beyond me, right? When you walk into the federal courts, as you guys have all seen, when you see people who are arrested in federal court, first thing they do is they get in there and they do an evaluation of the individual. They go through a matrix. They see if they're high risk or low risk. They got a criminal history. If they don't, And if they're low risk and they're coming back to court, they sign a piece of paper and walk out. I mean, you can steal $1 million and go down to federal court, sign a, and as long as you're not a risk of flight or a danger to the community, you're walking out of there. So then you can hire an attorney, you can keep working, you can provide for your family while you fight your case.
Well,
I mean, the system.
Real quick, that kind of sounds like you could be a person that tries to overthrow the government, and like you just said, federal court, they let you go home, and do what you got to do. Hey, and by the way, I need to go to Mexico next week, so could I get some time to go? And it's amazing that you say that, because you see this right in front of our face and how unfair the bail system is. But continue. That's a great point.
Well, and our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, I mean, he's been under indicted for serious financial frauds, and he rolls in there, post a bond, and he's out. He's been out, right? And there's allegations, still coming out about him. And you're right, there is a real privilege that comes from appearing a certain way when you go before a magistrate judge, and that's just the reality of things. And the system is it's got to change, and we could do a few tweaks in this bill, House Bill 2077 that Representative Ron Reynolds has introduced, addresses a lot of these issues by, number one, the biggest change that we could create to make things fair would be to create a presumption of release on PR bond for individuals that are charged of nonviolent offenses, first-time offenses, people who are low risk to the community, so that they get an opportunity just like everybody else to fight their case from the outside. Because it makes a huge difference, right? If you're inside and you can't work, you're getting a court-appointed lawyer, right? And that system has its problems. Obviously, we have some court-appointed lawyers that care about their clients, but we also have a lot that are overworked, underpaid, and don't pick up the phone. So, I mean, it really handicaps an individual if they are sitting in jail, not to mention the harm it does to their families and the criminal histories that it creates. I mean, we know statistically that people plead guilty to offenses they didn't commit because they're sitting in jail and they want to get out, right? And that just starts this criminal history building. So, the presumption of release for people who are low risk, individuals who are going to come back to court, who have committed nonviolent offenses, would be a huge step in the right direction. This bill also addresses what Gary spoke of early on. I mean, violent offenders, a judge can still deny bond on them. I mean, that's the way it is now. It's not like that right now. Violent offenders, a judge can't refuse to grant a bond or set a bond that's so high that they can't make it. This new legislation actually creates a list of violent offenses that would allow a judge, after having a hearing, looking at the person's background, to make a determination that this particular person perhaps should not be released because they are a risk to the community. So, as Robert was saying earlier, we're not talking about trying to release folks back out into the community that are in danger. What we're trying to do is bring justice to the system, so that when people get up in front of a judge, they have due process. They are treated fairly. They're not coming up, with a disadvantage from the very beginning. I mean, this is where the disadvantage. I mean, police reform is another issue that we're passionate about. We're also lobbying for the George Floyd Act. But once we get past the decision to arrest, this bail issue, in my opinion, is the most significant step in the process, because once you get locked up and you lose your job and you can't afford an attorney, things go downhill quick.
Right.
Well, let me jump in here, and Demetri, I'm gonna shoot this at you, and then you guys can jump on. I see we have a bail bondsman on here, BW Senior. Says, show me one defendant sitting in jail with $100 bond. Come on now. Let me say this about you, bail bondsmen. You're just like everybody else. Some days you're parasites. I'm gonna be honest with you, because you want to make money off the demise of poor people. So you're gonna do everything in your power to make sure that this does not happen. Mm-hmm. Because as long as people can pay their money to you,
Mm-hmm.
And some of them actually screw up, and you get to take the high.
Mm-hmm.
See if he'll come back. He done froze up.
Yeah, he froze up. Okay.
Yeah, he froze up there. Hey, let me finish addressing that question, that statement of BW Senior, whoever he is. Show me a one-time defendant sitting in jail with $100 bond. Come on now, which pretty much implies that it's easy to get out of jail. That's what he's saying. And he's probably walking around with more than $100 in his pocket. But I submit to you, Sandra Bland, her bond was what, $250, $500?
Yeah, it was $300. Sandra Bland. She couldn't find anybody to give her $300.
She could not pay it. And she was in there for an investigatory stop, turn signal, right? She was put in jail for what's basically a non-jailable offense. And then she could not pay that $300 bond, BWC, and she's dead today. So while you may have the resources yourself, sir, there's a lot of folks out there who do not. And that's simply our point to bail reform. You know, this kid that has a $100 bond, if he can't pay that $100 bond, give him a PR bond. That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. If the crime is so finite, right, that you're just putting a $100 bond on him, but he can't afford to pay that, well, I give him a PR bond, let him come back to trial, but let him continue working and taking care of his family.
And that really does highlight a bias in the perspective, right? That's coming from a point of privilege. There are people all the time who are sitting in jail who can't afford to post a $100 bond. That's just that is a sign of someone who is just has a different perspective, and they just can't appreciate that there are folks that are not situated and as fortunate as they may be. There was a gentleman that was highlighted in the Texas Tribune. I didn't know him. I didn't represent him, but I read about him. His last name was Cheney, and a 64-year-old black gentleman who couldn't make a $100 bail, who died in jail, who died in Harris County after being infected with COVID. So yeah, give me a break, right? We got people that are actually sacrificing their lives in jail because they can't post a $100 bail. And if you don't have enough empathy and human decency to acknowledge that, then come on, man. That's all I got to say about that.
Well, I'm back. I'll finish my comment, man. People make money off the demise of poor people. And any way that they can do that, sometimes they could care less how they do it. Everybody that goes to jail has not committed a crime. I'm gonna just be honest with you. Everybody that goes to jail has not committed a crime. All you got to do is go back 2-3 years and look at the number of people that's been exonerated. But yet you keep them in there on some humbug. And like my man say, oh, they got on $100 sneakers. I don't care if they wearing Gucci shoes. Bail reform needs to happen. And if it stops you bail bondsmen from making a killing, who gives a damn?
Well, I mean, and Khalif Browder. Everybody should know Khalif Browder's name. You know, kid in New York. He went to Rikers Island. I think he was 16. Stayed 3 years because of the lack of money. It was about he couldn't make bail. Now he served I guess you could say served 3 years. He wasn't even convicted or even saw a judge yet. But he stayed there as a child in Rikers Island, and everything you could think of happened to that poor kid. And then once he got out, he couldn't handle all that he had been through, and he ended up killing himself. And so for those of you guys who are, talking about it's just this amount of money, there's people who are actually losing their lives because they don't have the money. And mind you, Khalif Browder went to jail because he was accused of stealing a backpack. He wasn't in there because of, murder or something. A child of stealing a backpack that ultimately it turned out he didn't do. but his whole life was ruined and ultimately stolen from him because he just could not bail out of jail. So what do you fellas say about that?
Well,
I mean,
go ahead, John.
I mean, that's spot on. That makes our point, right? We have people all over the country, and this is kind of dovetailing with what Gary was saying earlier. There is a system that has been designed to make money off people that are running through this criminal justice system, and there are people every day who are languishing in jail who can't afford to get out, and it's a setup. They end up sitting down there waiting for their day in court. Well, right now, we've got a year delay where we've had no court proceedings as far as jury trials go. So if you're saying I'm not guilty, you've been waiting for a year for that trial. If you can't post bail and you're not guilty, that's a problem, right? I mean, the bail system should be, you always hear the people coming back talking about with the safety to the community. I mean, that's what our governor is going to be leading on his the legislation he's going to be promoting is, the safety of the community. Well, that's one factor, right? That bail is supposed to protect safety of the community. It's also supposed to assure a person's appearance in court. But the third thing that no one talks about is it's supposed to allow everyone to have due process and a fair hearing, because you can't have those things if you're locked up in jail and can't take care of yourself. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And I tell you, young lady Tadai Smith said that was a sad story. Well, what about the Central Park Five? Ray couldn't make bail. The other young man that got sent as a juvenile to an adult prison, and they did everything under the sun to him. No, it's not right. I'm sorry for y'all that don't get it, but you'll get it when it's your child locked in jail, your husband or your wife locked in jail, and these people do this to you. And God forbid you end up in a little country town, because they're going to run you through the ringer down there.
Let's address this though. Let's address her comment. She says, yes, that was sad, but the other criminals good riddance. So can you fellas talk to the point that just because you can bond out, that doesn't mean that you're innocent, because rich people who are guilty bond out all the time. So can you talk about that perception that people have?
Well, absolutely. I've never been to jail in my life. I've never been through the court system. And so a lot of this stuff I didn't understand either until I simply saw the disparities that were happening, the systemic racism that was happening, and couldn't help but do something about it. And so, if you've never been introduced into the criminal justice system, you don't understand a lot of this stuff. Like I said earlier, a lot of people think that, well, they're getting bonded, so no, they still got to come back for trial, right? You're not letting them go free, but you first must understand that in this country that you are innocent until proven guilty. These people haven't even been convicted of a crime yet, right? And they're stuck in jail over a bag of weed, right? And that there
misdemeanor weed charges.
Yes, and that there should be this presumption of innocence. But listen, I don't want anybody to, because we can go out go down a rabbit hole on this stuff. And one thing that I really thank George Floyd for, while while his death was tragic, he allowed some things to happen here in America that we've been trying to do for a while. Before George Floyd, you could not even mention systemic racism without saying you're using the race card. But America saw, right, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. What Black people saw was a foot on the back of our neck for 400 years. It had finally been uncovered. And so now we can actually use this word systemic racism. And that is the underlying issue to each and every component of criminal justice reform, including bail reform. It's a reason why you see 70% African American, Hispanic, and poor in there. There's a reason why we are overrepresented in the jails when we use drugs at the same amount that white people use drugs. There's a reason. This system, people say this system is broken. The hell it is. This system is working exactly as intentionally designed. And you can go all the way back to the Jim Crow law, to the black codes, to convict leasing, to them being able to jail a black man just because he spit on the side of the road, put him in prison, lease him out to the very same fields that our enslaved came out of. And you see the same thing happening today. You see the same thing happening today. And so never forget that the underlying issue of all of this, right? The gentleman said, well, I've never seen anybody in jail for, sitting in jail for one-time defending for $100. Systemic racism is, and he spoke, as John said, from a point of privilege, right? He's the one that's putting us in there, wanting to see us there. And so we cannot forget about this underlying issue of criminal justice, of systemic racism. John brought out a point earlier that, on our Democratic candidates and elected officials, on how, out on the campaign trail, they're basically afraid to speak out on issues of criminal justice reform because they feel like it's a burden to their campaign, right? But when you're talking about criminal justice reform, you're not just talking about black people, first of all. You're talking about bail reform. You're not just talking about Hispanics. You're talking about poor people as well, right? And you're talking about a system that is designed to oppress, right? Now, fellows that made the comment like he did probably want to see it continue the way that it is. Why? He keeps making money, right? The private prisons keep getting, they got to fill those beds up, right? They still have to make money off of the back of these people. And who better to stick in those beds than these folks whose names have been denigrated for 400 years? We can't lose sight of that fact and try to listen to this convoluted message of we just want to release all of these hard-nosed criminals out into the street. No, we do not. No, we do not. We want public safety ourselves. Hell, I'm part of the public. My wife is part of the public. My mama is part of the public. We want public safety, but we also want fairness, justice, and equity. And that part has been very hard to move through here in the state of Texas.
Fairness, justice, and equity. Now, as I'm studying criminal justice and I'm going back and I'm looking at the history, we have to understand that how police departments were started. They went through no training. They went through no nothing. Politicians basically got the right to pick their friends and put them on the police force and allow them to become police officers. You feel when I'm good? Allow them to become police officers. Now, the whole criminal justice system needs to be torn down and rebuilt. Let's just be honest about it. As long as the Constitution of the United States, written the way that it's written today, says that incarceration will exist in the form of slavery, the whole system needs to be torn down. So my question is, and I like to ask tough questions some days, why would a good, wholesome white guy like John Floyd give a damn about some Negroes locked up in jail?
Because I care about people, man. I care about justice. I care about fairness. Man, I love you. I love you, Gary. I love you, Robert. I don't understand why the rest of our community can't get on board with this. Is a very simple issue, right? I mean, I was raised in the public schools in the inner city of Dallas. I grew up with people from all different backgrounds, and all of a sudden, when people get out of high school and they start moving in their different directions, people go crazy, And for someone, and I've been thinking about some of the other questions that we have. When you see someone who says, "Well, that was a sad story," but right? But what about all those criminals? The reality is, in 25 years and representing thousands of folks who have been arrested or charged with serious crimes, man, I will tell you, I can count on one hand the number of people that are really deep down bad. Most folks are redeemable, and they need that opportunity to redeem themselves, and they can't do it under the current criminal justice system. It is just, the odds are against you, from arrest to being denied bail to getting lack of proper attorneys to the disparity we see in sentencing, and then it comes out the other end. I mean, people who are paroled out, there's even at the end of the system, there is still systemic racism in the system, and it's throughout the system. So that's why I give a damn. I mean, I give a damn about making this world right so that my children don't grow up in a society where we're still having these conversations that should have been solved hundreds of years ago, because white people like me don't have the guts to get up and just say the truth and just talk about what the reality of the situation.
Now, you know what I like about John and what he's saying, Donovan and Demetra. White people have to understand that a lot of the things that have to be changed, it's gonna have to be y'all to spearhead it. Because if you go back and you look at the history, it was y'all that put us in these situations.
That's right.
All we can do is just keep fighting, but it was y'all. And as far as the bondsmen, and y'all, I gotta dip out and do an interview for Fox News real quick, and I'll be right back. That you don't give a damn about public safety. You give a damn about your bottom line.
Mhm.
You are in it for the money, and bail reform is gonna cut into your money. Because you got far more people going to jail for weed than for murder. So you're gonna make your money any way that you can make it. And you're gonna convolute the message. You're gonna send up your lobbyists to Austin. You're gonna try to fight this. And it ain't your people that's going through this hell. It's mine. I'll be right back, y'all.
Well, I want to address this question to Robert real quick. Okay, let's say they do pass bail reform, and we know the system, as John just said, on both ends of it, all throughout the whole system is pretty much messed up. But a lot of people don't realize. One of the questions I have in here is, you go through the system, and let's say you do get bail. You have the resources to get bail. Okay, you get it, or they pass the bail reform bill. You get a trial, you go through it, you get exonerated. You still have the arrest record on your record. And I know there's a way to get off of that and get that removed and stuff. But, it's like you fix one part of the problem and you still got all these other components. So, with the bail reform, is there something, because I know the meat of what we want to do is the bail reform. That's the meat and potatoes. We can get the other stuff, later. But what else outside of the bail reform that we can do? Because like I said, I'm exonerated, I'm walking free, but I don't have the resources for the bail reform, and I don't have the resources to get an attorney to exonerate my record, even though I was totally innocent. What do you guys?
That's a great question, man. And that's why the Alliance put together what we call the Texas Fair Justice Act. Which includes a lot of the components, most of the components of criminal justice reform. But we walked into the session saying that we wanted to focus on our big five, right? Those big five were the legalization of marijuana, right? What they used to call a gateway and other drug. Nope, it's a gateway drug into prison. That's what it is. Legalization of marijuana, bail reform, ban the box, which is what you were talking about, Donovan, leaving a state prison simply to go off into a societal prison because of the collateral consequences of having a felony attached to your name, right? You get out, you got to check the box for employment. You got to check the box if you want to rent a home. You got to check the box if you want to continue your education to get a Pell Grant. I mean, you got to, and so if none of these things happen, what are you going to do? You know, you can't find a place to live, you can't get a job, you can't go back to school. Hell, you're probably going to end up committing crimes again, and the recidivism rate goes back up, which is why we were also pushing for a reentry program. We used to have a great reentry program here in Texas called Project Rio, where the Texas Department of Criminal Justice would work alongside the Texas Workforce Commission. They would actually identify these inmates who had 6 months remaining, would start working with them then on getting their paperwork together, their license, Social Security, sending them to the Workforce Commission before they get out to help to try to locate them jobs, trying to reacclimate them back into society to reduce the recidivism rate. And it worked well. Well, guess what? In 2011, it became a money issue. They cut that program. The recidivism rate jumped back up again. And so you're right, Donovan. You know, when we can pass bail reform, but if you don't do anything about reentry, and if you pass reentry, but if you don't do anything about the legalization of marijuana, comprehensive criminal justice reform is what we're working on, is what we're working for. And until we reach that, you know, and this is the reason why it has to be comprehensive, right? The other fix to all of this is a great moral uprising here in Texas or America. And we know that's not about to happen anytime soon, right? So in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, listen, we can't stop them from not loving us, but we can stop them from lynching us. And that was a direct policy, a direct reference to policy and legislation. And so that's why we work so hard to implement protective policy and legislation until that great day of moral revival happens in this state and in this country.
I have a question. So, in addition to the Texas House Bill 2077, is there going to be anything introduced addressing parole? Because we know a lot of times when people do parole out, like I think it was you, Robert, that said it's still some sort of a sentence. I don't know if you guys heard about a gentleman by the name of Joe Legion. He was the oldest or the longest serving juvenile inmate in America. And he was just released at the age of 83 years old, served almost 70 years. Now, he could have gotten out earlier, but he says, for what? You guys want me to be a parolee for the rest of my life? I gave you almost 70 years, so I'm not really going to be free. So he opted to stay in until they overturned it. And mind you, he was innocent of why he went in there. So what do you guys think about revising the parole the way it is now?
Oh, I definitely need some work. And I'll tell you, you know, we went in with this session with our Big Five along with some other components. There are, before it's all said and done, going to be about 8,000 bills submitted to the Texas State Capitol. I haven't tracked all of them. I'm sure that there are some parole bills in there. And once they do get up to committee, I will see them then and actually have some people lined up. I talked to a couple of lobbyists, and we had a African-American probation officer on the phone with us preparing for this moment that you're talking about, Dimitri. And the inside information that he gave us and some of the solutions that he gave us were wonderful. He is willing to testify. And so when that bill does come up, in whatever form it comes up, we'll be there banging for it. But, you know, it's you know, like I said, you know, when you're working on criminal justice reform in a comprehensive manner, you know, you kind of have to stay focused, you know, on a few things. You can't do everything at once. I mean, you just can't. But I will get back with you on that, Dimitri, on, you know, if we do have any parole bills out there. I'm sure that we do.
Hey. And John, let me ask you this really quick. So, okay, this bill 2077, it's in, I guess, memorandum of a police officer that was murdered, Damon Allen to be exact, right? He was
Yes.
murdered by somebody who was out on bail. Now, it sounds like the governor also agrees with this bill, or no?
So this is a tricky little political trick that's going on right now. So we have a Senate bill that's been introduced now by State Senator Joan Huffman, who is on the opposite side of things from my perspective, who has introduced what would appear to be a companion bill from the Senate side called the Damon Allen Act, which actually makes things much worse and expands the list of offenses for which people could be detained without a bond, and makes it much more difficult for people to get out of custody on pretrial release. In fact, limits pretrial release for a lot of offenses and limits the judge's ability to release people on pretrial release. And so there is, and Robert and I were talking about this earlier today. We are going to be, conferencing with Representative Ron Reynolds and the rest of our coalition partners that are addressing this bond issue, and deciding, what do we need to do to distinguish this particular act from that one? Because now that they got the same name, it's very confusing. And this is politics. This is dirty politics. You get bails that look just the same from a novice perspective, but there ain't no presumption of innocence, presumption of release in the Senate bill that's called the Damon Allen Act, but there is in the House bill that Ron Reynolds submitted. And so that is something we're going to have to be very careful in communicating to the public to make sure people understand that these are distinct bills that are very different. And we're going to need to be discussing amending this particular bill to make sure it's clear. You're right.
I asked because I thought I was looking at it, I was like, well, is the governor for it or is he against it? Because it sounds like the same bill you two are for. So that's why I was asking, because it was confusing.
It is confusing. Imagine if the governor was to have someone submit a Sandra Bland Act, right? I wouldn't put it past them. This is the kind of politics that we play in Texas, and it's the same thing they tried to do with the Sandra Bland Act last session. We started off with a very comprehensive, good bill, and by the time it got to the other end, we had to yank it because they had amended it and made it actually something that made things worse. So it's very difficult dealing with these folks, and it all goes back to this tough on crime, law and order rhetoric that these right-wing, white folks spew in order to gin up their base, and then our Democrats are afraid to push back on because they don't want to look like being, these bleeding heart liberals that are soft on crime.
Well, let me ask you this, John, because that brings up a good point of why I'm a recovering Democrat and the shenanigans that go on with, the politics of what's happening. Now, you're talking about tough on crime and things like that. We have a president that wrote a crime bill that significantly changed it just decimated the Black community and the brown community and just put all kinds of people in jail based on that crime bill. And as an attorney, I know you've seen it. I know, Robert, you've been seeing all this stuff going on. This man is in office right now as a Democrat, Mr. I'm tough on crime. He doesn't want to repeal it. He doesn't want to do anything to modify it or even to work with you guys. So my question is, John, I don't know if you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. But in the cases that you've seen dealing with the prison reform, you see Black people, brown people come up there, and they're hardcore Democrats, and they don't even realize some of the very people that they support isn't supporting them. I mean, what is your take on that? Because I think it's an oxymoron to talk about how great Joe Biden is, and he's for the everyday person, but he's the author of the crime bill.
He is, and you remember the Clinton supported that crime bill. Democrats up and down the ticket did. I mean, it's just that's a reality. That was when the Democrats, this strong neocon kind of movement really got its footing, And Democrats believed that we could start winning elections by running towards the middle and trying to scrape up the crumbs that the Republicans didn't want anymore. So we got big problems. I mean, I did not support, the president when we had the primaries going on because of this very issue. I did not support our vice president for the same issue. I mean, she has got some serious issues in her background. Some of the stuff that happened when she was in San Francisco and was the attorney general in that state. I mean, there are, but nonetheless, this is what we've got, right? And I think that and this is another thing that we talk about a lot, is we need to start holding our elected officials accountable. So if our Democrats get up there and they're talking, criminal justice reform, and they're coming to the Black communities every couple of years trying to stir up that vote, we need to hold them accountable, or we need to put them on blast. And that's about where we're going to be at the end of this legislative session. If the Democrats do the same thing they did last time, we're going to have to hold them accountable and call them out, right? I mean, we have to. We did it last time. We'll do it this time. The question is who's listening to us, right? That at the end of the day, this rhetoric about this tough on crime, this fear mongering that's been done since the beginning of this country, man. I mean, that's the reality, right? We've got this fear mongering that has been ginned up against the Black community since day one. It perpetrated itself through the slave patrols, through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and man, it's still here. It just looks a little bit different. It's about getting the money now out of folks. We can't just lease them out straight up to the sugar producers. But what we can do is find other ways to get money out of them, right? And that's what's going on here.
I think some of these legislators need to go up there and write some real bills. I think one of the bills they need to write is to do something with these people who lie on people and have them wrongfully incarcerated. They need to write a bill to deal with their police officers who bust into folks' houses and kill them in the middle of the night. That's the bills they need to write. What about those people? So, a lot of people, I'm thinking down here, we've had a lot of prominent people speak up against bail reform. And at the end of the day, you got to change the whole system. I'm learning things just from studying law that I never knew, that I actually never knew about how this system actually works. It's cool to build a prison, but you don't want to build a school. You don't.
You know what, man? You're so right. I think you froze up again there, Gary. But you are exactly right, man.
What the hell is going on?
I don't know, man.
I don't understand that. So people want to act like there needs to not be criminal justice reform or bail reform, just like the George Floyd Act. To me, it has no teeth. Yeah. And honestly, the George Floyd Act will never work until you get white supremacists out of the police force. It will not work. I don't care how you do it, what training you give them. It cannot work until you accomplish that goal. Robert?
One of the most important components of that George Floyd Act, man, is the section that deals with qualified immunity. And for people that don't know, that's the part that will not allow us to convict these people, right? You got a cop that shoots a man 7 times in the back. This is what happens on qualified immunity, right? It's 2 words that needs to be changed in there. That it needs to be changed from reasonable, just 1 word, from reasonable to what's the word for it, John? To they had to do it, basically, right? You have these cops that can come in now and say, well, yeah, I know he shot him 7 times in the back. Necessary, that's the word. I know he shot him 7 times in the back, but he was going to his car, so we can say that was reasonable for him to do that. But if you change that 1 word from from reasonable to necessary, was it necessary for you to shoot him 7 times in the back? Then no, right? But you see right now, Joe Biden don't even want to mess with the qualified immunity, right? You know, the George Floyd Act on the federal level, right now, you already have Tim Scott on the Republican side that's going around tooting this horn, and that's what he's talking about, the qualified immunity piece. It's going to be our biggest hurdle in the George Floyd Act that we have here. Now, I know you said that it's not strong enough. There are some other pieces to it that Synfronia Thompson decided to file separately. I think it's what, John, 7, 8 different bills, right? That all refer to the George Floyd Act. But I did want to tell you this part though, because you brought up the prosecutorial misconduct, and I'd never heard that word before until I ran across John Floyd. I actually chaired the committee that put together the criminal justice reform platform for the Texas Democratic Party. John Floyd joined me on that committee, and as we were restructuring this thing, I'll never forget, John brought up that point, prosecutorial misconduct. I'd never heard of it before. It's in the Democratic criminal justice reform platform right now. But you're exactly right, Gary. We seem to want to put all of the African Americans, the Hispanics, all the poor people in jail, and then we make these loopholes, right, for our elected officials, because qualified immunity affects them too, for our police officers, right? And the system simply just needs to change. I'll leave you with this. You know, our goal at the Alliance in working not only at the Capitol, but working with the Texas criminal justice system is to change this ideological mindset from perpetually punitive to restorative justice, right? It's just gotten completely out of control, right? And it makes so much sense. The restorative justice part makes so much sense when you can restore these individuals, reacclimate them back out into society. So now, instead of them being burdens to the taxpayers, now they're actually taxpayers themselves, right? And so we're working hard on that, and until it comes, man, we just got to pass some bills up there.
And Robert, I'd like to chime in on something that Gary was saying earlier that I believe is truly a problem that the whole criminal justice system has to address. The policing and recruiting of police officers from outside the community. When we have a police force that includes people who are outwardly white supremacists, right?
Yeah.
Who are proud of what they will call our heritage, right? Man, there's no kind of reform we can do that's going to prevent those folks from trying to take advantage of their position of power. So we have to do all we can to try to root out these kinds of folks. They need to be screened out from the very beginning. I mean, and I'm sorry, but if you're going out and recruiting police officers, white police officers from small towns out in West Texas or East Texas, I mean, come on, what are you going to get? I'm just going to be straight. You're going to get people that have never interacted with folks that don't look like them. And you're going to have people that are coming in, they're scared. They're scared of the communities they're policing. And that's why they got to treat these communities like they're war zones, right? And so we have to change the way that we address and train our officers from the very inception, where we find them and how we train them. Another thing, we disqualified immunity piece is extremely important. I've been arguing for the elimination of qualified immunity for 15 years, and you just can't sue a police officer unless you can prove that they have done almost this exact same thing before and knew that it was wrong, and some court has told them that it's wrong. You can't sue them. You can't sue the police force. The other issue we got is these police unions, right? They are our legislatures, tours on both sides of the aisle are scared to death of them and scared of being labeled as being some liberal soft on crime. a person. And so these police unions now have the ability of these contracts they're writing with these local police forces to actually overturn disciplinary action. So you get a bad cop who does something they're not supposed to do when they're on duty. You know, we've had sexual assaults, we've had robberies, we've had thefts, all kinds of bad behavior. In lieu of discipline, these cops can move to a different police agency and start off fresh again. We saw that happen in the Aubrey case. You got police officers who are facing discipline that just hop from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Part of the George Floyd Act that Safrania Thompson has presented is actually requires that there be a matrix that is developed statewide that sets out a whole litany of disciplinary actions and causes for disciplinary actions, and actually prevents police officers unions from overturning that discipline, and creates a database statewide so we know who we're dealing with and people aren't hiring these folks anymore. I mean, it's hard to believe that we don't have that already. Exactly. You know, there is no database that stores police shootings. I mean, so we really need to be storing all this information so the communities know who is policing them.
Well, you know, policing people, and John, you the white guy on the panel tonight. Welcome to the family.
John Black.
I'm pretty sure that you live in a predominantly white neighborhood. Am I correct? Now, here's a question, because I'd love to ask people. When you ride at night, how many black police officers you see? When we ride that night in our neighborhood, all we see is white police officers. Mm-hmm. That stop is not going to go well if you get stopped in the wrong place. Robert lives in Brazoria County. You don't want to get stopped in Brazoria County at night. You don't want it to happen. So I believe that if they're going to be straight up with it, it's a lot that needs to change. And you need to resemble, if we can say we're in Houston, we're predominantly Latino, we need a Latino police chief. Okay, we're in the predominantly Latino communities, you need predominantly Latino police officers. In the black community, you need black police officers. Where's Officer Friendly? Where the man that I grew up knowing that was the cop I saw every day in my neighborhood? You know, it's a lot that has to change, but I believe, and then we'll go to final thoughts, I believe that they don't want it to change. I believe it's too much money involved with the incarceration of poor people. And as long as they can keep incarcerating poor people and getting free labor, I talked to a friend of mine today, they locked up in Minnesota, and they checked for 2 weeks was $10.81. And you're going to work 10 to 12 hours a day to make $10.81. If we can't fix those things, we can't fix anything. But I really don't think they want to fix it, Demetra.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But things definitely have to change. This bail system, the way it is now, it really only serves the rich, while poor people who are a lot of times innocent, they sit there, you know, indefinitely, simply because they don't have the money. And so, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, you have to see the humanity in that. The humanity in, you know, allowing people, especially people who've never been in there before, you know, it's a first time offense or, you know, accusation, if you will. There has to be some humanity in saying, okay, let these people out on the OR, as we in California would say. I know you guys call it a PR, but let them out on their own recognizance, you know. But, you know, I can see if the people, you know, are repeat offenders over and over again, then yeah, you may have a case for that. But people who are, you know, like you said, a nickel bag of weed or stealing a backpack or something like that, it's like, come on, let's use some compassion and humanity. So absolutely.
Final thoughts, Donald?
Well, I just want to say, you know, you guys keep up the fight, keep up the great work. John, 25 years. Robert, you guys are just in the fight. We need more people like you. But I think one of the big things that we need to do is reform our our litigators and the lawyers that are involved in this, because you have a lot of public defenders that would rather just have the person take a plea deal versus, anything else. And again, they are overworked. I do believe their resources aren't the same because, hey, you can't afford a lawyer. They got caseload after caseload, and they always give the new public defender, that young person that just graduated law school, just passed the bar, and they're not experienced as of yet. And by the time they get the experience, they're off to start their own law firm, or they've joined a prestigious law firm. So I think we need to distribute the resources of the prosecution and the defense equally so that they have the same situation. Because if you are going to go to court, like you guys said, we want you to be out to keep your job and do all of that. But then, you're going to come back to court and get a equitable defense. But, too many of us, especially of the Black and Latin persuasion, we spend most of our life running from the law, and we're afraid of the law. I mean, you got people that don't even show up to child support cases. So we need to do something about that. But I want you guys to stay in that fight. Here in California, just like Texas, we have big problems. As a matter of fact, I don't know, I'm going to do a video on this on my channel. And we've known this for years. The police department have gangs within the police department. So we talk about racism. Let's talk about the gang warfare that's going on right in these police departments. So that's something we got to work on too. But keep up the great fight. Also, before you guys go, is there a website or is there, something that, where we can go and kind of look up information?
Absolutely is. Yeah. And I posted it. I think I posted it in there, but it's www.texansforjustice.com. www.texansforjustice.com. And you'll see our 3 priority bills on the homepage, which is the George Floyd Act, our Ban the Box bill, and our bail reform bill, along with talking points and the bill text. It's all there. Before we go, Gary, I want to comment on one thing you said, man, when you're talking about police in our neighborhoods, which is basically the community policing part. And it's so important. I hear so many people say that training, cultural diversity and implicit bias training is not important. It is, especially when you approach it the way that we do. And we have 3 asks on this cultural diversity and implicit bias training. One, that it comes from an outside source, right? It doesn't need to be done by the officer sitting down there that's getting ready to retire that does a 8-hour course in 30 minutes unless the boys go home. It needs to be continual, and there needs to be consequences for non-compliance. If you apply those 3 to cultural diversity and implicit bias training, I guarantee we'll see some results. Gary, thanks for having us tonight, man.
Well, I tell y'all what, man, I'm going to close it out with saying this here. Tomorrow night, we're going to get an extension of this conversation because my good friend Noel Pennock will be on here. And we're going to talk about removing white supremacists from law enforcement. And if these people can't come up with a way to do that, then why don't the federal government start attacking their funding? The same way they did with racial profiling. So we're going to have that discussion. And, for me, I'm out in the morning. I committed to something almost a year ago, and that was to get justice for George. So I hop a plane in the morning, and I ain't coming back until Chauvin is in jail. And that's all it boils down to. Now, what am I going to do? Don't worry about that. Just know I'm good at what I do. And we want Mr. Chauvin in jail for a long amount of time, and it's going to be what it needs to be. And last but not least, tomorrow is $2 Tuesdays. We're running for the school board. And as you saw with the move that was made today, you just might need me more than you actually could ever imagine. More than you could ever imagine. So tomorrow, $2 Tuesdays, if you can donate $2 to the campaign, then guess what? We almost there, man. We got a lot of work to do. But I want to thank our guests for taking the time out to come and hang out with us tonight because we need them in the fight. But they ain't in the fight alone. So Robert and John, when you need me to testify in Austin, if they let us back in the building or if we have to do it virtually, just let me know. And I'll be glad to show up all black, dressed in all black, with a black baseball bat, because I'm swinging for justice across the board, man. And that's what it is. And I'm just saying it. So thank you guys for taking the time out to hang out with us tonight. But tomorrow night, we're going to shake it up, man. Qualified immunity, huh? I tell you what, if we can get these white supremacists out of law enforcement, we might have a shot at living more than one day. I want to thank my good friend Donovan Sadiq for tuning in. Our two guests tonight, John Floyd, attorney, and my good friend Robert Williams. I am the 5-star general. Minnesota, get ready, because your boy on the way. And for those that's there, you know how I get on, man. And I ain't leaving until Derek Chauvin is in them handcuffs. Yeah. We'll holler at y'all tomorrow night.
Peace.